minds and okay, that's okay. So like minds and like hearts coming together, and this is where healing happens. So I'm wondering, can I bring the mouse in there and click? Okay, let's try that. So I sort of just mentioned Julien's house is a place for grief and bereavement. And before I answer this question, I have one for each of you. So a little bit of audience participation today. So show of hands for whoever has lost a loved one and didn't really know where to turn with that grief, or just how to really get through that time. Me too. No. You're not alone. As you can see, there's quite a few hands there up in the room. There we go. Alternatively, maybe it wasn't yourself that has lost a loved one, but maybe somebody that is close to you lost somebody and you wanted to be there for them and weren't really sure how to step in, you know. So something that we talk about that is passed on through a gentleman named Dr. Alan Wolfelt, we'll talk about him a little bit later in the presentation here. He talks about the rule of thirds. So that's where people are showing up in your life in typically one of three categories. That first category is folks who they're there. They know what you're going through. And even if they don't, they're just holding that space for you. So they're bringing those casseroles, bringing the Kleenex. Are you eating? Are you sleeping? You know, I'm going to be there, whatever you need. Second category of people are typically well-intentioned and maybe just don't really know how to hold that space. So that might look like, you know, hey, you know, I know you're going through a difficult time. If you need anything, just let me know. Okay, I'll be over here just waiting for that phone call. But we know as humans, it can be hard to reach out for help in the first place. And you add that layer of grief on top of it. Well, now it's become nearly impossible to reach out for help. And so that person is there, they're waiting, but we don't make that connection because we don't know what we need, right? And there's that third category of people who maybe they're not showing up at all. Maybe they don't know how to. And so they're giving us space, right? They think that's the right move, and that's okay. That's what they are familiar with. We live in this society of death denying, and you know, we might be sitting there one day talking about, you know, at my funeral, I want this song to play, and the person next to you goes, oh, don't talk like that, right? We've all been there. We've probably even all said it ourselves. But it's important that we do talk about death because we are going to all experience loss if we haven't already, and eventually our loved ones will experience our loss. And so helping them handle it in the most comfortable way that we can is good to just have a sense of preparedness. And that can be really important for when that grief does come knocking. Unfortunately, that's sort of how we find out about grief right now is not until it hits us. And then we're sort of left feeling confused or isolated. Just to reiterate, you're not alone in not knowing how to support people, right? And so Julien's house, our mission is to support, educate, and companion people through grief. So we are more on the peer support end of the support spectrum. We don't have clinicians, so we're not doing counseling or therapy. As you'll see later in my presentation here, we offer different means of peer support. So these are typically people who have experienced a loss of their own and are volunteering their times back to Julien's house guests. So as Julien's house, we don't have clients, we have guests, and we welcome them with open arms. So a little bit about how we began. So here's Julien Gaudet of Julien's house. Julien passed away. Can you see okay with this? Okay. Trying to sort of move here. Julien passed away in 2011 from a traumatic head injury. He was 18 years old. And, you know, just hanging around with his friends, goofing around, and just, you know, rowdy teenage boys, right? Accidents happen. And this was a serious one, unfortunately, and Julien lost his life. And as his parents were doing their own grief work and doing their healing, there's two bereavement specialists here in Windsor who they would have met through CMHA. So they did some of their bereavement work there at the CMHA. They've got great programs as well. And these two bereavement specialists recommended that they visit this place here. So this is the Coping Center in Cambridge. And as you can see, it's a beautiful space. This is completely dedicated to grief and bereavement. And so those two bereavement specialists that recommended the Coping Center sort of had this idea in their head that we really want to bring something like this to Windsor. You know, they had that idea. They're sending people there in the meantime. The Gaudets went, and when they came back, they were so Germain, the dad of Julien, he does the best thinking at night, from what I understand. We get our late emails from him going, I had a thought, right? I'm sure many of you could relate. I think that's when my brain is doing most of its spinning, when I'm trying to go to sleep, right? And he said, Christine, we've got this house, right? They had this house, that's their plan for retirement. And they said, let's donate it. Let's create this space in Windsor. And so here we have our founding members. So this is Christine McMillan, Colleen Campo, and Christine and Germain Gaudet. And so they are cutting the ribbon. Now that's not officially at the house. The house is under construction right now. But this is them saying, we're getting things started. We're cutting that ribbon for our community. So here we have, you can see the roots of Julien's house. Although Colleen is covered here, but luckily she was in that last slide. So, and some of you might know Colleen. I don't know, any show of hands for Christine? No? Okay, well then I'm happy to introduce you to them both. They're wonderful people. Like, we might be trying to.
Yeah.
We can see Colleen smile. Smile.
I can't do my.
Oh. Thank you. And I had separate notes that were attached to the PowerPoint that typically in presentation mode, the presenter can sort of see those on the side. So we're just winging it here. And then we have our Julien's House staff. So here we've got Laura Kay, who is our executive director. Just going to back up 2 seconds though. So how Julien's House initially started was through volunteers and through some borrowed staff from the Windsor Children's Safety Village. Once we that ball started getting rolling and we saw more and more people needed our services, they said, okay, I think it's time that we hire 2 full-time staff. And so last spring is when myself and our executive director, Laura Kay, came on the scene at Julien's House. So Laura Kay has an extensive background in fundraising and not-for-profit. Maybe
I worked with her since I worked with her at the chamber. I worked with her at on the cancer relay for
she's extensive background. Yeah, she's
really lucky to have her.
We are. We certainly are. Yes. Yeah. We are thrilled to have her. She is just constantly raising funds for us, making connections, and she's fantastic in her role. We have myself, which Irene sort of let you know my background there in the beginning, coming from University of Windsor with Family and Social Relations. I was at Muscular District Canada for a little bit and Children's Aid for many years before that. So it was myself and Laura for the first little bit, almost a year, and our numbers were growing. So when I came on in spring, we have a 76 guests with Julien's House that are accessing our services. As of yesterday afternoon, we had 217. So the need is there. We know that is undeniable. And so enter our third staff member here, Denise Turner, who we were able to bring on with a grant. And so that grant keeps her with us for a year contract, although fingers crossed, we are able to keep her longer. As our numbers grow, I don't think we can go down in staff. We only need more. So we are thrilled to have Denise, who also has a background in deaf education, and she is a wonderful asset to our team. She is our activities coordinator. And so that might look like things like different ways that people are working through their grief. So we'll get into that a little bit further on in the presentation here. And so we consider ourselves grassroots. And so what that means for us is that limited funding means doing what we can with what we've got. This has sort of become our unofficial motto at Julien's house, do the best we can with what we've got. And we know that we've got an amazing community around us. And so house or no house, we know that the need is there for support. And so we are relying on our community right now. We have support groups that we offer, which we are running out of a church basement. This is the space that became available. And interesting, somebody had mentioned the United Church, I think, at the beginning of the meeting. I think it was during the sing song. There's some mention of United Church. So interesting fact, our meetings are run out of Emmanuel United Church right now. So I just thought that was a funny little connection, right? So also we have community partners that we utilize their space. So hospice has a beautiful, it's called April's Gardens, if you've ever been. It's a really beautiful spot. Various yoga studios, Families First has their beautiful tributes building that we're able to run some of our programs in. Local parks and trails, so we have a monthly walk that takes place, and we're just getting out into the community. So that's been a really beautiful part about not having a building actually to start off with. You know, when I first started, I was sort of like, how are we going to do this? Oh, life would be so much easier if we had our own brick and mortar place to be. And in actuality, this has been a really beautiful way for our programs and services to be out in the community and for people to learn more about us and us more about our community. We are client driven, so we're always listening to what people need from us and sort of developing our programs around that. So that has certainly been an excellent way to do it. And grassroots also means volunteer. And so grief companions. So these are the folks that I mentioned earlier that have gone through a loss and are volunteering their time back to Julien's house and just helping people with a more recent loss get through that difficult time. And so is that a new term? Has anybody heard that term before, grief companion? Yeah, that makes sense. Anybody at home? There are no hands raised in the room here, so that makes sense to me. As I mentioned, we don't talk about grief, right? And so grief companioning was developed by this gentleman here. I mentioned earlier, Dr. Alan Wolfelt. He's who I call my grief guru. He has written something like 90 books on the subject. So very, very wise man when it comes to grief. And so when we take the word companion itself, we break it down into its original Latin roots. We've got com for with and pan for bread. So someone that you would break bread with, right? A friend, an equal, right? And so that's the idea here, is that this is somebody who has a similar lived experience. We know that friends and family can rally around us with all the supports that they've got. But then until you can actually say, I know what you're going through, I've been there, right? That's a different kind of connection that can sort of bring about a little bit deeper connection, a little bit more healing and hope. And so just to reiterate, our grief companions are individuals who have that lived experience, and after doing some of their own grief work, they find themselves in a place where they want to be able to support somebody with that loss. Grief can be very isolating because we don't talk about it openly in our circles of friends or out and about. We can feel really withdrawn and isolated. And we know that connection can really bring us out of that deep, dark hole sometimes. So that's really important to get us through that journey. And so we've got our 3 pillars that we operate by. So first, so you may have remembered earlier in our mission statement, we talked about support, educate, and companion. So here with support, how we initially started was doing one-on-one matches. So we would have our grief companions who have gone through a loss of their own. A new guest would come in, express what their loss is, and we would try to match up as best we could. So whether that was a child loss to a child loss, right? So they can talk about yeah, that sounds familiar to me, or I remember going through that. Here's some things that I tried that worked for me. And so that was initially how we started. As I mentioned, our numbers and guests have really grown, especially in the past year and a little bit. And unfortunately, our volunteer numbers have not grown as much as our guest numbers. If anybody knows anybody, spread the word, we need volunteers. So what we have really shifted our focus to right now is our support groups. And so initially, that was something that we had on the docket as well. It was something that due to COVID times, we were doing that twice a month on Zoom. So that was every other Wednesday, those were taking place. When I came on last spring, something that I heard loud and clear was we want in-person meetings. There's something to in-person that you just don't get over Zoom. Sorry, Zoom folks. But so I heard that. And so we went from every other Wednesday, just every type of loss coming together. And we broke it down specifically. So we have a child loss meeting that happens twice a month. We have a parent loss meeting that happens twice a month. There's a spousal loss meeting that happens 4 times a month. Now that is broken down. We have an evening and a morning. So each of those happen twice a month. And then something that I learned along the way is that siblings are often called the forgotten grievers. So we've got some nods here. So yeah, that, that could look like maybe their sibling died and people are stepping in going, okay, you got to really be there for mom and dad, right? And you got to step in, but they're grieving too, right? So when I learned about that forgotten griever term, I said, no, we're not forgetting the siblings. So now we've got a sibling loss group as well. Yeah.
I just something that stuck in my head. If we go back 1 or 2 slides, there was the last line that said someone to say, I know how you feel.
Yes.
And the only way that I take a little bit of umbrage of that is that in my mind, every situation is different. And I remember when I lost my mom many, many years ago. But people say, I know I lost my mom too, or I lost my mom too. And my first thought is, oh, I feel really bad for you. But I'm pretty sure the situation is really, really different.
That's
My
fair.
mother's age is different. The time where I was in my life, the relationship I had with her is different than the relationship you had with your mom.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if sometimes we don't, you're the expert, but we don't get a little cliche with these things. I know how you're feeling. When every situation is completely different.
Yeah. Thank you for bringing that up, John. I appreciate that. Yeah, every situation is different. There is no doubt about that. We often talk in our groups about designing a pamphlet for funeral homes of what not to say, right? Because you're exactly right, John. We get stuck in these cliches, right? Oftentimes there's things like they're in a better place now. That's the last thing I want to hear. The best place is here beside me, right? What do you mean a better place, right? Or they had, 65 good years. What's wrong with 65 more, right? We don't want to hear these cliches, and yet they are repeated time and time again. We may have said them ourselves, right? Just because we don't have that information. So yeah, this is a great point for people coming up going, I know how you feel. And so typically when we talk about our companion matches, if you were to come to us with your loss, we would be looking at somebody the most similar. So not necessarily just anybody that's lost their parent, but maybe it was through the same way, right? So maybe it was a degenerative disease. Maybe it was an accident, right? So we're really looking at those factors to see the best matches that we could possibly make. But that's an excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up, John. Yeah. And so back to our supports here. So with our support groups, so I was just going through all of the ones. So we've got child, parent, spousal, sibling. And then also what I did was when we were moving from that general loss and breaking it down, the experts tend to say, keep those losses separate, right? Don't mix them all together. But what I heard from the guests at Julien's house during those meetings was I really liked getting to know what my mom might be going through, because I've got this other widow in the group, even though I'm here for parent loss. You know, I hadn't considered that maybe my mom is feeling that way. And to hear this widow speak about that really opened my eyes. So we kept that mix on the table. So we do have that as well. And then we kept one Zoom meeting a month as well, because we know that not everybody can get out of the house. There are accessibility issues, there are childcare issues, you know, there's sickness that's always going around. And so we want people to be able to access our programs and services no matter. And then our restorative activities. Yes.
Do you have trainings for your volunteers?
We do, yes, good question. So anybody that would volunteer, they would connect with me initially. We would go through the different volunteer opportunities. So that could be grief companion. It could also be coming out to an event and maybe helping us sell raffle tickets. Could be leading a restorative activity that we've got going on. So we've got someone who is doing we called it our morning through movement. So every Wednesday, this volunteer would lead a gentle movement class, sort of Pilates type movement. And part of that is we recognize that emotions can get stuck in our bodies, and doing some mindful movement can help to release those. We also know that participating in activities where you're surrounded by other bereaved individuals can feel a little bit safer for you than just going out to your local community center. And so just creating that space for everybody can be really, really supportive. And then just even learning something new. So last weekend, we had a bicycle maintenance workshop. You might think, what does bicycling and grief have to do with one another? But it's that making space to learn something new, right? You're getting out of that grief by opening up your mind to learn something new rather than being stuck in that rut. And then we know that exercise in itself can change our chemistry up and sort of, you know, get the happy feelings going a little bit for us, right? Those endorphins. Okay, so here's audience participation time. And if anybody at home would like to participate as well. So you heard me talk a little bit about our restorative activities. What I want to know is, if any of you were in a time of grief, or if you can think about being in a time of grief, what sort of activity would you be looking for? So this is something that we are always growing and evolving with, and we love hearing what people would be interested in doing in their time of grief. We are 2.5 staff over here, so we only get so many ideas, right? And we do have a lot, but we're always collecting more. So, yes.
I've actually experienced a lot of grief in the last couple months. One activity that has helped me is gardening.
Gardening, okay, I love that. Yes, this is something we definitely want to see once our location is up and functional. I envision a garden club. So that could look like, you know, maybe you were on your way to work or on your way to meet up with some people and you think, you know, I'm really in the middle of my grief today and I can't do those other things. I'm gonna stop by Julien's house, pick up the shovel and some gardening gloves and do a little bit of gardening before I head out to my next activity.
Reading and deadheading is.
Gardening, isn't it?
It is though, and there's no end to it
There is.
and no beginning, so you can start and stop whenever you want. I'm
That's
just
right.
saying, it's
That's
the thing,
right.
it's
Yeah.
the thing.
Yeah. So
And you
we
don't ever
envision-
have to finish it because it's never done.
No, it's like laundry.
Well, laundry's not near, yeah.
Yeah. That's nicer reward. Yes.
And if you eventually get to the point where you can never enjoy exercise, but if you can get to the place where you know that it will help you, you can go to the gym and then you will know that when you're done, you will feel better.
Yeah, just checking in with yourself, going, okay, how do I feel entering this gym or this workout situation? Then once you leave, check in again.
And you will know, even though when you're going up this, well, I have to go
Yeah.
upstairs to get to my gym and I'm making an icky face. But I know when I'm done, I will be better.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. Great point.
So I work with patients on physio, and
Okay.
so sometimes grief is it's not from loss of someone, but it's a loss of function.
Yeah.
So, you know, often I'll say to my patients, if they've been in a car accident or something like that, have you made any plans for that anniversary, that first anniversary of your car accident? When your
Great
life
idea.
changed so drastically.
Yeah.
And so we talked about that and, you know, certain things, one of the things I often recommend is just go for a walk. More, I was around, opposed to going around the block, maybe something, a nature area, so, you know, taking use of an Ojibwe or, that type of place where once you're in that area, it is very healing. For
Very,
a lot of,
yeah,
for a lot of people.
yeah.
Nature.
Nature is the wonderful thing.
And the other thing is, so when you're ready to do your garden at Julien,
Yeah.
I have lots and lots and lots of seeds for various native pollinator plants, and you should see, I'm sorry, shameless plug again. You should see the pollinators that I have in my garden is so awesome. You know, you see them lining on the flowers that you planted, and that's very therapeutic. So just let
Okay.
me know, and I can bring over.
That's fantastic. Do you have a card? I'll give you my card. We'll exchange.
Yes, yeah,
Perfect.
I'll take your card. Yeah.
Great. Okay, thank you. And gentleman behind you here, you have. your
Well, I
hand
think we've said it, but I was gonna say, for those people that a shovel is too much, a walk through a nature park, will see flowers that have been planted by someone else.
Yeah,
Even if you're with someone or by yourself.
Yeah.
It's, as you said, really rejuvenating.
absolutely. Yeah, that nature factor. Yeah, it plays a big role. Anybody else, any ideas that they find therapeutic? And we're always looking for different things too, right? So something that I envisioned actually that might surprise people is a kickboxing class. You know that anger is a part of grief, right? And so whether that's at how the person died, or maybe, you know, the last thing that you said to them and you're holding on to some anger. And so finding the right outlets for that. We have a guest who I was sitting next to speaking with during a journaling class, and she was enjoying the journaling class. It's very therapeutic in itself, but she said, I feel like I have this anger and it's so unfamiliar to me. I don't recognize this feeling, and I don't recognize myself when I'm going through it. And so I don't even know what that right outlet is. And so that's part of our restorative activities, is finding those outlets for all the emotions that come with grief. We know that there is no 5 stages of grief. That might be familiar to you with Elizabeth Kubler-Ross, who initially developed the 5 stages of grief, but never with the intention of it being step 1. Now we get through step 1. Now we're at step 2. Now we get this, right? It sort of doesn't go like this. It sort of goes like this, around and back and forth, and it's all over the place. You can have all the feelings all the time, right? And so we talk about waves of emotions a lot.
Do you do things with music with people at your house?
Not yet, but we
Because
definitely
I'm
want to.
willing to volunteer to come
Okay,
and play some music with people.
that would be wonderful.
And they can request a song ahead of time. And
Beautiful.
that's very moving because it kind of allows people to release energy and.
Yeah,
release feelings.
Music can
It can
really
really be
hit the heartstrings. Yeah,
scary for people.
yeah. Okay, another card exchange over here. Definitely. Thank you for that.
Courtney, I don't really want to give you any grief, but we're,
How are we for time? We're getting tight. Okay, I'm gonna just sort of start zipping through these then. I'm not sure what number slide I'm on, but so we talked about support. We've got education. So we're doing our community outreach here. Hi. You know, and learning about the community itself and what we can do in it. And then we've got our companioning, which I spoke about earlier. So I'm just gonna keep zipping through. Another thing to note is when we're talking about who's right for Julien's house and who might not be a good fit, a great thing to know is, while there are many types of grief, these 2 here are pretty important. So we've got acute grief versus complicated grief. And essentially, to sort of keep mindful about time here, acute grief is what we're all naturally going to go through. And understanding that grief is normal, natural, and necessary for our own process, but it's how we get through it. So if you find that years down the road, you are still in that day 1 grief, that's when it might be time to reach out to a one-on-one counselor, maybe a crisis center if you're feeling those really low points. And that's okay, right? The key important part that I'm telling you here today is grief is okay. We don't need to be scared of it. It's just finding the right supports for where we're at. And so this again is talking about who is it for. And so we've got, so emotionally stable, and you might think, how can I be emotionally, I'm in grief, what do you mean? What I mean by that is you're just getting the basics done, eating, sleeping, breathing, which maybe sounds silly because those things are natural, but even with breathing, we're living in that shallow breath versus taking a mindful, deep breath, and really being where you are in that moment, right? If we are over time and anybody needs to get going, I totally understand. Or are you ready to walk me off? I'm gonna- yeah. Okay, then I gotta get, so it's not for folks in crisis mode, or who are experiencing complicated grief. This talks about referrals. If you have any questions about referrals, please call me. Here's a list of all of our committees. We are always welcoming new members. So if anybody has extra spare time on their dockets they would like to donate to, our key takeaways. So grief is under supported, and while our brick and mortar is still under construction, we know that grief is present regardless whether we're ready for it or not. That's actually the nature of grief. We're not really ready for it. Know that grief doesn't need to be done alone. Keep in touch. So whether that's with us, with your friends and family, keep those connections. Volunteer with us. Connect for some restorative activities. So we've got a couple already today, which is so great. And again, that grief is normal, natural, and necessary. And then shameless plug from me, we have our upcoming fundraiser, which is a golf tournament here. This is our second annual. The afternoon spots are filled. It's a double shotgun. I'm not a golfer. I don't really know what that means. But I did participate. Last year, it was a ton of fun. Sandra and I were also in the women's tournament this year, which was a ton of fun as well. And finally, thank you so much for having me out today. Apologies for going on. I was worried I was going to be under time, so here we are.
Courtney, grief is one of those things that all of us have faced, probably will face. Men
Absolutely.
usually do grief differently, we tend to internalize more
Mhm,
and use copious amounts of alcohol.
mhm.
But other than that, it's something that we need to probably address more in our
Yes.
society.
Yeah, especially men.
You've enlightened us, Courtney, thank you very much, and we are a green club.
Oh,
We talked about pollinators, this is the end product here.
thank you so much.